Very good. W- Want to welcome those who are joining us um, on Facebook or YouTube or however they're doing it. So, welcome. And we are starting uh, the story of Joseph, which I find to be one of the most compelling stories in the Torah. So, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Going to the screen share. Here we are. So, vaYeshev, vaYeshev. vaYeshev Yaakov, and Jacob settled the Eretz Megurei Aviv in the land of his father's sojournings. So the issue about being a sojourner is that you're not a permanent resident. And the Eretz Canaan in the land of Canaan. And there's a distinction between being a ger and being a toshav. So being one settling as opposed to sojourning. And of course, at this point, they had not yet actually, excuse me, one moment, a uh, little bit of housekeeping there. So you know that, of course, Jacob wasn't actually a settler in the land of Canaan, in a sense, because the Jewish people, the conquest had not taken place yet. And so there's some lovely commentaries about the Hebrew here and the subtlety of this language, of these two verbs that basically describe the same thing, but in a different way. And this is really talking about, so when you settle, it's like settling down, right? Jacob had had such a tortuous life up to this point. Uh, the last being the death of his beloved Rachel in giving birth to Benjamin, that he was hoping to actually be able to settle down. And of course, we'll see in the very next sentence that is not going to happen. Rashi. vaYeshev Yaakov, and Jacob settled. Achar shekatav, Rashi is going to give us a sort of a bit of a overview of biblical style here. Achar shekatav lacha yishuvei Esav v'toldotav b'derech tzara, after the scripture described for you the settlings of Esau and his generations in a brief manner, uh, just the executive's overview. Shelo hayu, why? Shelo hayu sfunim v'chashuvim, because they weren't distinguished, important, lefaresh, to go into detail, to explain, hey, ach nityashvu, the way in which they were settled, the seder milchamotehem, and the order of their battles, ech horishu et hachori, how they uh, conquered or took over the Horites. And this is mentioned in Deuteronomy, how the people of Esau, the descendants of Esau, the Edomites, were not the original inhabitants of the area they finally occupied. So this is described in the previous chapter, which describes Esau and his descendants in this brief manner. Executive summary. Piresh lecha yishuvei Yaakov. Now he explains to you the settlings of Jacob, V'toldotav, and his descendants, the derech aruka, in an expansive kind of way, in detail. Kol gilgulei sibatam, the events and their details. Literally, I gave you Gilgul is like the turnaround. It's Galgal means a wheel. A siba means a cause. But the events and their details, the fi shehem chashuvim, because they are considered important before Hamakom, before the Holy One. laha'arich bahim, to go into detail, to go into length, to be at length with regards to them. And similarly, you find Asara Dorot regarding the 10 generations Sheme Adam va'ad Noach that go from Adam to Noah. Ploni holy. Ploni, all you read is that so and so begat so and so, ukeshabah Noach, but when he comes to Noach, he goes into length over it, over him. And likewise, the 10 generations from Noah to Abraham, Katsar Bahim. He goes into little detail. It's basically in short form. Umisha Etzel Avraham. And I just want to make sure all of you are muted, please. Umisha Etzel Avraham. And when he arrives to Abraham, He'erichbo, he goes into detail over him. Mashal. So he gives you a mashal parable. The margalit, a pearl, shenafla bein hachol, that fell into the sand. Adam mimashmesh bachol, a person feels around in the sand. Vekovro bikavara, and sifts it out in a sieve. Ad shemotze et hamargalit, until he finds the margalit, the pearl. Umishimatzah, and once he finds it, humashlich et hatzrurot, he casts out the pebbles, miado, from his hands, venotel hamargalit, and he then takes the pearl. So there are obviously significant reasons why we go into the life of Noah and the life of Abraham, and in this case, the life of Jacob. Even though Esau was his twin brother, we don't, the Torah is not interested in going into a great deal of detail regarding the lives of the people who intervened between Adam and Noah and Abraham, and now Esau. Davar acher, another interpretation. vaYeshev Yaakov, Jacob settled. A comment on these opening words. Hapashtani hazeh, this flax merchant, nichnesu b'malav te'unim pishtan, his camels entered, laden with flax. Hapachami, the smith, Tama, is wondering, Ana yikanes kol hapishtan hazeh. Where is all this flax going to fit? Where's it going to go? Haya pikach echad mashiv lo, and a certain smart person said to him, replied, Nitzutz echad yotze mimapuach shalcha. One little spark goes out from your smith. Yesoref et kulo, which will burn all that flax. Kach Yaakov. In this sense, Jacob, Ra'ah kol ha'alufim haktuvim lamala. He saw, from a literary standpoint, he saw all these heads, these chieftains that were mentioned in the previous chapter, where where they're describing Esau's descendants. Kama, he was perplexed, he was astounded, Amar, and he thought, Mi yachol lichbosh et kulan, who is going to be able to overpower, to conquer all of them? Ma kativ lamata, however, what is written below? Ela Ele toldot Yaakov, these are the generations of Jacob. And the next sentence, look at this, Ele toldot Yaakov, you're safe. These are the generations of Jacob. And what would you expect to follow after that? Reuben, Simon, Levi, and look at what happens. You have Yosef. So again, there's a lot of subtlety in how this is being written. So Ela Toldot Yaakov, Yosef. These are the generations of Jacob, Joseph. Uketiv, and it also in another verse says, this is, I believe, in I'm trying to think now. Um, hmm. It's one of the minor prophets, and I'm not sure if it's Malachi. Vahaya Beit Yaakov Eish, the house of Jacob will be a fire. Uveit Yosef Lahava, and the house of Joseph a flame. Uveit Esav Lakash, and the house of Esau as straw. Nitzotz Yotze Miyosef, a spark goes out of Joseph. Shemekale Besoref Ekulam, which will destroy and burn all of it. And this is in an old Rashi manuscript. Let me double check and see if I can find the quotation. Oh, sorry, it's Ovadia. Ovadia. That's where that comes from. That verse. Sorry. Uh, And I think that, it's easy, of course, to look at this and say, well, it's talking about human conquest. And I prefer to shy away from that because, to my mind, and I can quote you actually Churchill, who says, war creates more problems than solutions. It might solve one problem, but it then creates a ton of other problems that then have to be dealt with. And so the way I'd like to say interpret this particular passage in Ovadia and what's being drawn out here in this Rashi is that we're talking here about values. We're talking about human values. And that so if you meditate and think about it, there are so many things that human beings pursue, especially for money. No question about it. But they pursue fame and fortune and power, and those things have relatively little importance when you consider the span of life. And so I think what it's talking about is that those sort of values are the values of Esau, and that at some point or another, people are going to recognize that this is not what life is about. And I prefer to see it that way than necessarily human beings killing and destroying other people. It's rather a change of emphasis of what human life is really about. Going on. Ele Toldot Yaakov, these are the generations of Jacob. Yosef, Joseph, was Ben Sheva Esrei Shana. He was 17 years old. Haya Ro'eh et Echav, he would pasture with his brothers. Batzon, the flock. Vahu Na'ar et Bnei Vilha, and this is an interesting verb here, okay? Because Na'ar, which means a youth, also carries with it the connotation of the follies of youth as well. So there's sort of an implication of immaturity here. But the point was that he went along et bnei Bilhah with the children of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, the She Aviv, the wife of his father. And it's interesting that it's leaving out, of course. Again, I think we need to check the mute button, please. Make sure you're on mute.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can I just ask something
Of
because
course.
it's
Me
going
one
on?
second. Of
Um,
course.
it has always seemed to me that the concubines are, it's like um, they're like surrogate mothers,
Yes.
that they aren't, mothers themselves.
Hmm.
They're surrogates, that would be the equivalent of us. Um,
Yes.
and so I just wondered about that. So, but I'm sorry, I thought I
No,
had
yeah,
turned off and I didn't.
no problem. And I welcome the comments and the questions. You know that. So let me just finish this sentence and then I will try and comment. Hold on one second. Sorry. Okay. vaYeshev et dibatam ra'ah, and Joseph brought um, bad reports, el avihem, to their father. So to respond, Judith, to the point you raised, I had read some years ago a commentary that suggested that Bila and Zilpah were actually sisters, but through concubines, through Laban's concubines to Rachel and Leah, that they were actually half sisters through, but of course, when you're the child of a concubine, you do not have the status of a full offspring. Um, I'm going to assume that, of course, we know that the reason why Jacob wound up with Bilhah and Zilpah is because Rachel and Leah, it was basically because Rachel was childless. She asked Jacob to have relations with Bilhah and have children through her. And then because she was doing that, Leah said, well, I want the same for Zilpah. So that's why Jacob wound up with them. Uh, so I I'm I can only speculate, right? I haven't read midrashim that go into this. Um, I think you're right, and at the same time, of course, I think that they're still mentioned, and so I have to suspect that they were also involved in raising the children, at least on some level or another.
Yeah, no, I didn't mean
Right,
that. I just it
right,
serves that purpose.
right.
But wasn't Sally Hemmings the half sister of Thomas Jefferson's actual wife? I had heard that,
So
and
you're,
it's a
yeah.
similar situation, perhaps.
Say that I didn't hear the last thing you said.
Sally Hemmings
Right?
um, was, I had heard, the
Yes.
half sister of Thomas Jefferson's wife.
Okay. Okay.
And so it would be a similar kind of a situation, but
Right.
status is another issue.
Right. Not considered, at least at that time, not considered incestuous.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
yeah.
There was one other thing I thought about that pasuk.
Yes.
Yosef was hanging out with his half brothers,
Right.
the sons of the concubines.
That is
And
correct.
maybe it was because the sons of Leah did not want to be with him
Right.
because they were jealous of him, because they knew that their father loved his mother more than he loved their mother.
Well, I think
He
you're
was
absolutely right.
so and the sons of the concubines were not so, they couldn't look down on Yosef the way the sons of Leah could.
Right. Right. And nor would the expectations necessarily be the same either as the full sons.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, the Torah, of course, goes into specifics as to why the brothers despised him. But now what's interesting is that if we're understanding this verse the way it's standing, here he is, here are the half brothers, or well, they all were half brothers, right? But here are his brothers through the concubines, and he's bringing bad reports about them. That's not exactly nice. I don't believe being a talebearer is something that's encouraged in Judaism as a value. So the people who are willing to be with him, all right, willing to be with him, he's coming back to his father and giving bad reports about them. At least that's what it's looking like.
Yeah, tattletale.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right. So let me go back to the Rashi here. So there's something remarkable about the writing here. As I said, what it does is the writing itself goes to tell us in this more subtle way that from Jacob's standpoint, who were his descendants, and that was Joseph. Now let's let's just play around with this for a moment. Let's dig deeper a little bit. Had life been different, how many wives would Jacob have had? Tell me. Certainly implied by scripture. How many wives would Jacob have had life worked out the way
One.
he wanted? Correct.
Right. Or one and
Huh?
the concubine or the maid who came with her.
Again, but wait a
Right.
second. Would that have been what Jacob had wanted? No.
Right.
Jacob would have wanted to have, had it been the way Jacob would have liked, he would have had one wife. It would have been Rachel. He would have had just one wife, and he would have had children through Rachel. And look at how divine will sometimes works in contrary ways to our own personal desires and wants. And Jacob winds up with 4 wives. Okay. And he winds up with one child from his beloved Rachel, and loses Rachel in the birth of the second child. Loses her. Life totally doesn't work out the way he would have personally scripted it. And I think that's significant. And I think in this incredibly beautiful and literary way, this is what makes the Bible such great literature, that it describes realistic life situations and uses language in such a powerful kind of way to, to help us, to try and help us understand, because life seldom works out the way we script it. And how do we deal with it when life doesn't work out the way we scripted it? And to realize there are sometimes way more, way deeper things going on than what would happen if, in fact, we scripted life. And to deepen our hearts, to give our hearts a certain measure of depth. But this little phrase, Ele Toldot Yaakov Yosef, wow, it says it. It basically says, this is it. And so we can understand, I mean, to finish this thought, we can understand why Jacob treated Joseph the way he did. Because Joseph, at 17 years old, was now entering maturity and was the one little piece that as a grown up, okay, as compared to, say, Benjamin, that Jacob had, that was left of Rachel. And that's why it's so important that we read about the death of Rachel before we get into this. And the irony, because if it were up to Jacob, Rachel would have had 12 kids, or as many kids as he could have had. It never worked out that way. So beautiful how the Torah describes Jacob in those very early years, where there he is, the smart aleck, tricking his brother Esau, etc. And what transforms him as he matures and as he learns what life really has to offer. And for those of you who haven't heard me say it 1,000 times already, I have an easy formula for depression. Formula is unrealistic expectations or false expectations. If you have unrealistic or false expectations and they don't work out because they're unrealistic or they're false, guess how that makes you feel? How does that make you feel? Tell me. I'll tell you then. It makes you feel angry. Makes you feel angry. When your expectations aren't fulfilled, you feel angry. And what is depression? It's anger. It's anger turned on itself. And the reason why I think so many people are depressed, not clinically depressed, but sort of emotionally depressed, is because they've been taught unrealistic expectations, and therefore, and those expectations aren't fulfilled, and so they're miserable. But if we have realistic expectations, and if our hearts can somehow absorb and embrace realistic expectations because we've learned what they are, then we're not disappointed. And not only that, we can find ways, we can use our reason, our ability to reason, to actually find ways to be joyful and to be appreciative and to learn and to see the blessings that we tend to overlook when we have unrealistic expectations. So this is a powerful, powerful statement here. So I think we barely have time to at least to begin this next Rashi. Okay, it just says Eile Toldot Yaakov. But Eile Shel Toldot Yaakov, Eile Yishuvehem v'Gilgulehem ad sheba'al l'chlal yishuv. So he explains how to, he gives another way to understand what's going on. Okay. And these generations of Jacob, and sometimes Tolda, which literally means, children, generations, literally can also refer to sort of a history. It's sometimes used to simply describe a story. Eile Yishuvehem, this is where they lived, the Gilgulehem, and all the various, well, as I said, Gilgul means a wheel, literally, but I think it's talking about the sort of the turnabout, Ad Shebahu, until they arrived, Lechlal Yishuv, until, and there's the vaYeshev, into actually being settled. Siba Rishona, and the very first cause, Yosef ben Sheva Esrei, Joseph being 17 years old, etc. Al Yedei, because of this, of what was going on here, the details that were given, that he was 17 years old, that he was pasturing with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, and all that's going to follow in a little bit. Nitgalgalu, it all sort of turned out, right? One thing caused another thing. That's what the Gilgal is about. What caused the next thing? The Yardula Mitzrayim, they wound up going down to Egypt. Zehu Achar Yishuv. And this is after a settling, Pshuto Shel Mikra, Liot Davar Dibur Al Ofanov. So the simple meaning of the scripture, that just explaining things the way they're meant in a simple sense. So this is, in other words, it's following the Yishuv, that vaYeshev Yaakov is sort of an overall statement to tell you the one thing following the other, etc., etc. Umidrash Agada, and a midrashic interpretation, Doresh, Tala Hakatuv Toldot Yaakov beYosef. And from a midrashic standpoint, it explains that scripture hangs all the generations of Jacob on Joseph, Mipnei Kama Dvarim, for several reasons. Achat, one reason, Shekol ot atzmo shel Yaakov lo avad etzel Lavan, because the Jacob, the very essence of Jacob didn't serve Laban, Ella Barachel, except for Rachel. This is what I was explaining to you before as to how many wives would Jacob have had he had his own way, if he had scripted his life. Veshehaya ziv ikonin shel Yosef. Another reason that Joseph's face, that he looked, Domeh lo, looked like him. Joseph looked totally like Jacob. V'kol ma she'ira leYaakov. And not only that, if you compare what happened to Jacob Irali aso Yosef, it also happened to Joseph, right? Did Jacob's brother hate him? Yes or no? Did Esau hate Jacob? Yes. Did Joseph's brothers hate him? Yes. Here we go. Ze nistam, this one was hated, veze nistam, and the other one was hated. Ze achiv mevakesh lahorgo, this one, his brother desires to kill him. Veze echav mevakshim lahorgo, and this one, his brothers desired to kill him. V'chein harbe beBereshit Rabbah, and there are many other examples in Bereshit Rabbah of how their lives were completely parallel. But on Nidrash Bo, and there's another interpretation, vaYeshev, this is so lovely. Bikesh Yaakov leishev b'shalva, Jacob desired to settle in peace. Hafatz alav rogzo shel Yosef, and said, right after that, just in wanting that, right, all the emotional anger and everything happened to Jacob. He had to go through that. And then Rashi makes an interesting observation based on tradition. Tzadikim mevakshim leishev b'shalva. Righteous people seek to settle in, peace, contentment, etc. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be He, thinks or says, Lo Dayan, is it not sufficient, La Tzadikim, for the righteous, Ma Shemetukan Lahem Lo Olam Haba, what is prepared for them in the future life. Elam Mevakshim Leishev B'Shalva B'Olam Hazeh, but they want to live in peace and contentment in this world. And that, of course, is begging a lot of commentary, and I'm going to at least some explanation. So we're going to stop here because of time, and I'm going to stop the recording, and we'll try and pick this up tomorrow, this particular thought. A little bit of theology here. So I need to stop the share, and I will stop the recording.